Today we're going to go on a field tour. So we're going to take the opportunity to look at cover crop work that's been done from central Oregon across southern Idaho and down into Utah. And I'm Steve Hines. I'm with the University of Idaho Extension in Jerome County. We really want to thank Western SARE for providing the grant funds to make this opportunity possible. And we are going to head over to South Central Oregon. And there are actually three presenters involved there. The first is Fara Brummer. She is faculty research assistant with the Oregon State University Extension Department of Animal and Rangeland Sciences since October 2016. Currently, her research projects are focused on restoration potential of arid and irrigated ground. She's going to be talking about a program that she's done with a producer, John Shine, who is a custom grazer in Lake County, Oregon, where he grew up. He left for 35 years and returned to purchase his grandparents' ranch, where he currently operates 1,000 acres of irrigated ground, 9 pivots, and grazes 700 head of cattle during the growing season. And then Fara is also going to be presenting a presentation for one of her colleagues, Dr. Serkan Addies. So welcome, Fara. Take us to Oregon.
All right, thank you very much there, Steve. Actually, we're in Southeast Oregon. I'm going to show a little map in the next slide. Thank you, everybody. This is great to be here with you, even though it's through a screen. And this is going to be a pretty whirlwind tour because I'll kick us off with introducing our project here, which was a Western SARE funded project. John Shine, who is in the picture there with the cowboy hat, is our feature producer, and he received a farmer rancher grant. And so he came to myself and Serkan and asked us to help him regenerate his degraded pasture, which is what we're talking about. He wanted to do it cost effectively, and he really wanted to introduce these cover crops in his perennial pasture. And many of these cover crops are what we consider novel, newer forages for us in this country, but they can really boost grazing quality and also soil health. And these were two of his goals. So if you can see that picture up there, that's Lake County, Oregon. And much like I think a lot of the country in which our participants live and work in, it's high desert, it's high elevation, low precip zone. Growing degree days are about, we have frost-free period about 100 days. So it's very, very short that we have soil temperatures that are conducive to keeping plants, forage plants growing and productive. And our primary ag production system is beef cattle production. So arid lands dominate our landscape, but the irrigated grounds that we also have support that, that cattle industry. And they provide a great opportunity for cover crops. So, 16% of our private land is irrigated. And the estimated dry matter tons for native grass, about 2 tons and 3 tons per acre for cereal grain production on these lands. With the use of other forage species, we could potentially produce 10% more dry matter forage, resulting in higher dry matter tons per acre and supporting potentially an additional 80 to 128 AUMs for a quarter section pivot. So these are really alluring goals when we look at them. In the picture in front of you, hopefully you can see 2 slides. And the one on your left is our brassicas that we put in as a treatment. And I'll show you our design pattern in a couple of slides here, but you can see those little brassicas that are emerging in our drill rows. And that was over drilled into John's perennial pasture, his existing perennial pasture. And then on the right, you see one of our really great crops that we got a lot out of, and this is Berseem clover. So it's a worm-loving species, and it did very well in this particular field. So, why do we want this opportunity to improve these degraded perennial systems? Well, it's costly to dig up and replant perennial pasture. And there are many of them around this country and probably into the Western rangelands that could be improved just by putting in cover crops. One of the drawbacks of these perennial pastures is that they're nitrogen limited. So they're typically cool season producing pastures, cool season grasses in them. They're nitrogen limited. And in this particular pasture that you're looking at, Kentucky bluegrass had taken over. And some of you have probably dealt with Kentucky bluegrass. It's highly rhizomatous and can be quite aggressive. And it had really taken over that A horizon in the soil, impacting water infiltration and soil moisture holding capacity. So we had heard Dr. Yost talk about this last Thursday, and I appreciated it, that increasing organic matter can potentially change that. It can potentially increase also soil moisture holding capacity. And John had recognized this, and so really his goals for putting in these cover crops were to not only increase his grazing days and his quality, but also his soil health, thereby decreasing his irrigation cost. So this is what we did as part of this Western Sahara project, and this was our first year. We worked on his 22-acre pivot, and we divided that up into quadrats, so 4 pieces. And then within each piece, we had 3 treatments, and our 4th was a control. And we randomized those treatments and controls within the pivot system. And this is kind of the fun part. This was our seeding mixes, our methods, and the dates in which we did this. So this was very much a learning year for us doing this. We went ahead and initially seeded in early spring. So if you look at that table, May 5th and 6th is when we first put the cover crops in the different treatments. And we did add fertilizer with that. We really did that for the cover crop mixes themselves. We didn't add a very high rate. We just added about 4 pounds of nitrogen per acre, so very, very low rate. But you can see our diverse mix was our treatment 1, cool season grasses, some forbs, and then 2 clovers that can tolerate warm temperatures pretty well. Treatment 2 was our cover crop mix, kale, radish, and forage oats. And treatment 3 was our clover base. What you could think of is really our legume base mix with a mix of clovers. We had trefoil, sandfoin, and emetic in there. So a mixture of annual and perennial legumes. And we went ahead and seeded those in with the Great Plains drill. We interseeded into that perennial pasture, and we had a complete failure. So you learn by your mistakes, right? And so John, being an optimist, said, let's go ahead and try this again. And so we did in July 17th. But it was a great learning opportunity for us. We did have our seeds germinate and come up, but they just did not persist. And the reason is our timing was completely off. So that was the big lesson that we learned that we wanted to share with you guys, is that timing is very, very key, very critical when you're working with these over-drilled pastures. What had happened was the cool season grasses had continued to grow and overwhelm our drilled mixes. Now I need to tell you also that all of these pastures, or all of these treatments, in the pasture were grazed before we went in and drilled. And they were grazed about 3 to 4 inches stubble height. Our goal was not to preserve the existing perennial grasses, but to obviously outcompete them. So we grazed a little bit lower than we normally would. But in spite of that, the cooler temperatures in the pasture and the additional fertilizer that those perennial grasses hadn't seen before just caused them to shoot back up, and they overwhelmed our drilled mixes. So we went back in July 17th, we modified our treatment somewhat, And you can see the modifications in that table there. We put in the 2 forbs and the clovers in our treatment 1. We swapped out our forage oats for a warm season sudan grass and added a vetch in treatment 2. And treatment 3, we didn't put in the trefoil. It's very expensive seed, as some of you know. So we left that out, and we took the medic out as well. And this time we had great success. So this time the forages really came on, and they came on strong, some definitely better than others. And John and Sirkin will talk more about that. But this July 17th seeding was definitely a success. I put in there also in 2017, we seeded birdsfoot trefoil in this pivot. And the reason I'm putting that in is because we saw the fruit of it this year. It wasn't part of our project this year, obviously, but the seeding that we had done in June, on June 13th of 2017 really came to life this year. And in fact, that birdsfoot trefoil was extremely lush and thick and provided a great forage as well, complementary forage in this pasture. I'm gonna leave the field results for Sirkin and John to discuss. One of the things that happened after we did this project was John was able to graze 92 cow-calf pairs for a week in the fall, and very much enjoy that heightened grazing quality that he got from our interseeded forages.
Hey, we're out here with John Shine, producer and livestock operator in Lake County. And John is an innovative producer. He has actually taken it upon himself to seed in supplementary forages, novel, what we call cover crops. And John, do you have a few comments on this year's experience?
Well, we've got a field here that I was here when I got the ranch, and it's got a lot of intermediate wheatgrass, and it does really good early in the year. And then once we get into 90 degrees in July, I can pour the water to it and it stays green, but it doesn't grow anymore. So I wanted to try something in this hot part of the summer to see what I can do to keep cattle grazing out here. And so we planted a bunch of cover crops this year, and we planted first in May, but we fertilized it, and it made the existing stuff grow so fast that all our cover crops didn't amount to anything. But we got a good crop of our base mix, but then we came back in the middle of, I guess, the July 15th and replanted again a bunch of cover crops. And it's been now, what, 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm impressed. I mean, these annuals, some of these, the sudan grass is coming in great, some of the plantains and radishes. And our goal is also to get the soil to have more organic matter in it so that we can hold moisture better. So I'm very excited about some of these vegetable type plants that have like a radish or a turnip, and some of these that will help us build our organic matter, and also getting some of these clovers with deep roots. And so I'm excited. And already on this grow, we're getting a good germination, and it's exciting. So let's see where it goes.
So John, the main goal is to increase your grazing days. And do you think and we'll find out at the end of the year, but do you think that's actually going to happen this year?
Well, I mean, normally right now I would have just turned this pivot off once it gets 90 degrees and just leave it off the rest of the year, because it doesn't even pay the electric bill. It keeps it green, but it doesn't grow. And what I'm seeing here is some real growth. I mean, that sudan grass is just taken off. So we're probably turning cows in here towards the middle end of September, and I think we're going to have a pretty big crop here. Whereas otherwise we'd have nothing. So yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
And then what are all these yellow flowers here? Can you tell us what's going on here right where we are right now?
Well, this gal named Fara showed up here a couple years ago and said she wanted to mess with some seeds, and I said, well, I'll give you, I think it was about an acre then. Yeah. And so she planted this birdsfoot trefoil in here. And at first I thought the whole thing was a waste of time because it didn't really grow. But 3 years later, where we're standing right now is where Fara planted the birdsfoot trefoil, and it's the dominant plant here. So it just took a while. It's about 3 years to get here, but the first year she was here, I thought that was a waste of time. But we're standing in it right now, and it's the dominant plant, and it fixes nitrogen, and cattle love it. So, yeah.
And also John made a good observation that it is a nitrogen fixer. The plants around it are quite green, and even some of the sudan grass that typically doesn't look as lush as we would like it to, in this spot has some more green to it. So that kind of confirms this is the sudan grass that was planted without nitrogen, and you can see it is growing, but it's lacking in nitrogen. But in this trefoil stand, we have sudan grass that's actually looking relatively green and lush. So the whole idea of this is to increase grazing options, grazing days, grazing quality also. That's something we don't think about with cattle so much, or I was thinking biomass. It's how we base our AUMs. We don't think quality so much. And this is a higher level of quality for these grazing cattle, especially middle, end of summer, like John is saying. So thank you, John. We sure appreciate all your efforts, and this is an exciting project.
It is exciting. So we'll hopefully be turning a bunch of cattle in here in into September, and they'll be swishing their tails and gaining weight in here. So.
So like I mentioned, middle of summer, middle of September, John turned 92 cow-calf pairs out, and they went to town. You'll see in the data that Sirkin is showing that unfortunately we did not see a significant difference in biomass with treatment versus control. Part of this is because we went ahead and planted so late. If we had planted 2 to 4 weeks earlier, let's say mid-June, which is what we would suggest and what we're going to try this next year, we may have seen a difference in growth of treatment versus control. The other reason is just time. So we expect that this pasture will improve with time and will continue to produce some of those perennial forages that we seeded, continue to produce more in treatment area versus control. Sometimes it's just nice to see the ruminants on the landscape utilizing the forage and recycling it back onto the field. So with that, I'm going to go back to my slideshow and wrap up with Sirkin's slides.
Hello everyone, this is Serkan. Newly established pastures generally provide more desirable forages with higher metabolizable energy content. The carrying capacity of the pastures can be increased tremendously. Higher forage production, together with increased feeding value of pastures, would be reflected in more milk production and rapid weight gains of the cattle. Old pastures are characterized with low legume contents and poor feeding values. Depending on the pasture conditions and our farming capacity from the availability of the equipment perspective, pastures can be renovated from the scratch after tearing up and working the ground, or can be overseeded with mix of grass and forb species. If the pastures are severely or partially damaged and contain lots of weeds and a lot of bare ground, then total renovation is preferred. In renovation of pastures, one of the most critical decisions is the choice of pasture species that are compatible and will persist multiple years, producing high-quality forages. Overall, grass-clover pasture mix form the basis of low-input production systems. Maintaining 20 or 30% of legume content in pasture is a good target. We prefer including legumes from both agronomic and feeding value perspective in our pasture mixtures. In pastoral systems, nitrogen is the most limiting factor for the plant growth and forage production. In particular, legumes with their symbiotic relationships with the soil bacteria, they can fix atmospheric nitrogen in their roots. White clover, for example, alone can fix up to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre annually. As you could follow from the graph, legumes in pastures with additional moderate amount of fertilizer can double the forage production as compared to grass-dominated, unfertilized pastures. It is important to know that most temperate cool season grass species are nitrogen deficient and go dormant in summer, even if the irrigation is available. Legumes also provide forages with superior feeding value and help improving the efficiency in grass-fed or pasture-based livestock production systems. Overall, higher the legume content of pastures, greater the live weight gains of the cattle. Dr. Mark Adams' study from Utah State University indicated that birdsfoot trefoil can be a highly effective forage crop in pasture-based finishing systems. In her study, cattle that graze birdsfoot trefoil as compared to those grazed grasses had greater live weight gains. Most importantly, the dressing percentages were significantly higher for the birdsfoot trefoil finished steers than for either feedlot finished or grass finished steers. So the carcass weights of birdsfoot trefoil finished steers were similar to grain finished steers and higher than grass finished steers. I highly recommend her article published in Hay and Forage magazine, which I provided the link in this slide as well. As Fara explained before, bearing all these points and benefits of legumes in mind, we wanted to test the potential of overseeding some annual and perennial forage mixtures for their effects on pasture production and forage nutritive value in a high desert area in Lakeview. Basically, John's irrigated pastures were grass-dominated and highly nitrogen deficient. His pasture production in summer was particularly disappointing even under irrigated conditions. This is in fact not a surprise to me, as most of these cool season grasses require high nitrogen to produce forages, and even if the soil moisture conditions are ideal, due to high temperatures in summer, they go dormant. From these perspectives, he needed to increase both legume contents and diversity of his pastures. I'm not going to repeat the establishment details or the mixtures that we used in this study, but I will talk about our initial observations and our preliminary results. First of all, botanical composition of the pastures. In mid-September, when we harvested the forages, indicated that our establishment on forb and legume mixtures were very successful. At the initial stage, we were able to increase the legume content of the pastures up to 15%. While the dry matter yield of pastures at the establishment phase didn't change much, there was a small response of crude protein. When we looked at the area that were overseeded with birdsfoot trefoil in summer 2007 and compared the quantity and quality of the forages, the results were impressive. In these areas, the legume content of the pastures were over 40% and the forage yield was doubled. More importantly, the quality of the forage was far superior with low fiber and high crude protein content exceeding 20%. This already proves the potential of overseeding and shows us where we will be heading with our newly established pasture mixtures.
With that, I'll just turn it over to you, Steve, and thank you all for listening and participating.
All right. Thanks, Fara.